Okay, so my colleague Vanessa Morrison will be your MC for the morning session. Vanessa is the Associate Director of IQC, an expert in community engagement approaches around built environment issues. She leads our annual request for proposals, which is our way of matching community projects with teams of students and faculty. She teaches the environmental design practicum, where students often get their very first exposure to hands-on community engagement with real partners around the state. She's been instrumental in IQC partnerships like the Just City Mayoral Fellowship with the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Please welcome Vanessa.
Thank you, Shane, our brilliant and fearless leader. And good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome to the 2023 Placemaking Conference. We are here, we made it. We're not on a screen, we're in person. And I'm just so overjoyed to be here with you all today and open up our first segment, which is gonna be a beautiful exploration on what is the ecosystem of a community and how can we better understand and define that together. And today you'll get to hear about some critical elements that come together to create a flourishing, thriving community. And we'll get to really dig into some topics that are related to how do we strengthen the connections between community assets and neighborhood spaces through a design perspective. How does entrepreneurship and development play a role within these priorities? And also, how exactly do we plan and design for all? So I'm so excited to moderate today's discussion and for you all to hear from our phenomenal speakers. And in a time where many of us as community builders are working each and every day to strengthen the social and physical infrastructures of our communities, we're always looking for those answers and looking for that guidance to help us do that work intentionally. And so again, I'm really excited for you all to hear these perspectives and have the discussion today and have all of us be challenged to look at how do we approach this ecosystem building from a holistic lens. All right, so I'm gonna begin by introducing our first guest speaker, and I'm gonna introduce all of them before they come up. And I'm gonna begin with Kia Weatherspoon, and I'm gonna share a little bit about her story. So Kia is the most decorated Black interior designer in our nation and has spent the last 15 years defying every design stereotype. Her voice, her advocacy, and design practice has shifted the narrative, making interior design a standard for all. Kia is challenging the lack of these standards in economically challenged communities, which is so important, by utilizing her voice, her design skills, presence, and leadership, all as platforms to challenge, to push, and to support housing developers, agencies, and industry partners to do better. As a design industry advocate and educator in business leadership, in equity, justice work, diversity, Kia has been awarded multiple and nationally recognized honors and appointments, including an honorary doctorate from the New York School of Interior Design. And so Kia is actually not new to the OU community. She has lectured here before through a dream course and came highly recommended by one of our graduate assistant students. And you all are about to see very quickly why we could not pass up an opportunity to invite her to be here with us today. So please give us a round of applause for Kia. All right, so, and then next we'll get to hear from Mukul Malhotra, who is an urban designer that develops innovative and equitable solutions for the new American city. As a principal and director at MIG Incorporated, his award-winning designs have created thriving downtowns and historic districts, as well as livable new communities and university campuses. His work has inspired urban revitalization, multimodal connectivity, sustainability, community inclusivity, and preservation of historic and neighborhood character. He is also a co-author of the book Streets Reconsidered, Inclusive Design for the Public Realm. And I actually had the amazing opportunity to work with Mukul last year on the Mayor's Institute for City Design initiative that Shane mentioned that was really focused in on helping support mayors in medium and small-sized cities to see how they can use design interventions and engagement interventions to address inequities in their communities. And I was just immediately inspired by Mukul's thoughtful yet tactical approach and seeing how you can support communities and really look at those nuanced rituals and activities and how do we come in and support those communities but not disrupt what's already there and what's already in existence. So I'm so glad Mukul was able to join us from Colorado and be here with us. Please give a round of applause and welcome Mukul. And then last but definitely not least, this morning we'll hear from Allison Quinlan, who is an internationally recognized architect, landscape architect, and small infill developer. She has founded and runs multiple companies that focus on design, development, and historic preservation based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. She also serves on the Fayetteville Planning Commission and the Construction Board of Appeals. Allison grew up right here in Oklahoma, from western Oklahoma, on a large working cattle ranch. And she really deeply believes in the potential for developers to become advocates of their neighborhoods while leading redevelopment in communities in a way that protects and includes residents and sustains long-term change. And she's passionate about how do we build and cultivate beautiful, lovable communities. And so we have been watching Allison from afar for quite some time, and I think the world has been watching Northwest Arkansas and the growth and expansion over the years. It's so impressive and inspirational, so we're really excited to have Allison come in and share that expertise in those perspectives. So welcome, Allison. All right. So we have a couple of presentations. We're going to start with Kia, but before we get into the presentations, I wanted to give a quick announcement that we are the segment before lunch. So after we do our presentations, we're going to have a moderated discussion, a debrief, what we heard and what we learned today, and then we'll release you all for lunch. But please be back here seated at 1:30 and make sure that you are positioned so you don't miss any of the afternoon sessions. And so I'm going to go ahead and invite Kia up officially. Also, Kia is our Goff Chair of Creative Architecture lecturer, so I'm really proud to have her and have her here with us. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, Kia.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, how are we doing this morning? Timekeeper, where's my timekeeper? This does not count. This is making sure the crowd is just lively. Are y'all ready for an interactive and engaging conversation? I need a little bit more. All right, there we go, there we go. All right, so good morning. My name is Kia Weatherspoon, and I am very, very excited to be here. And I want to start with this slide, and I want to acknowledge you all and to let you know you are enough. Wherever you are today, whatever headspace, you are enough. And that's going to be an important theme as we continue to talk this morning. And this is really critical because I am certain that our pathways are our stories to our purpose. And I want to share a couple stories with you. And the first one, this is me and my brother, Cody. I am the child of an addict and an educator. And a big trauma that really affected our family very early on was my brother was incarcerated for 15 years. And that would take my family on this journey of going in and out of prison facilities. And I viscerally remember the first time I walked into a prison. And it was the most inhumane experience that I have ever been through. And every year I would continue to think about it from other people's perspectives. The kids going to visit their fathers, the grandparents going to see their grandchildren, the mothers going to see their children, the spouses, right? So every step of the way, I thought about others. Even the guards. It was an inhumane experience. Fast forward, I joined the military in 2001. I joined the United States Air Force and literally was right up the way in Wichita, Kansas. Nothing kicks ass without tanker gas. Shortly after I got there, September 11th happened. And I was on my first of 4 deployments to the Middle East. I was 19, it was my first time out of the country, it was my first time away from my family. And I was a prideful little 19-year-old, and I needed to cry, but I was not gonna do it in front of these other adults. So I was in my tent, I was in Tent City at Al Udeid Air Base in Doha, Qatar. I took some sheets and I hung it from the top of my tent and I made 3 sheet walls. And that was the first space I ever created. And I bawled like a baby for 15 minutes. And it was something about how that space healed me. It brought me comfort and it brought me solace. And I would do that on 3 different deployments. So when I got out of the active duty military, I said I want to do this thing where I create spaces for people that impacts their lives. And this is where everyone goes, oh my God, that's such a good story. But is it though? Because literally, what did I just say? I had to go to prison and war to realize spaces matter. You with me now? Okay. Right? So I think a lot of times we have to think about how do people come to design? And when I say design in the context of this conference, I want to be thinking about architecture, landscape, environmental design, civil engineer design. How do people come to design? So I'm going to tell you one more quick story. And I remember after I got out of the military, I went to work for a company, a hotel management company, and it was time for me to better myself and go get a formal degree. And my CEO, he was the best type of CEO to have when you got out of the military. He was right, he was rich, and he was sexist. And I tell him, I'm gonna go to school now and get my interior design degree. And he told me, you can either go to college or you can continue to work here, but you cannot do both. And right then I knew I was not motivated by money. I was motivated by making an impact. And you should never make a decision based solely on the dollar, but always what is the best path for you. So fast forward, we're gonna talk a lot about love and feelings, right? As Shane mentioned, feelings are really, really important. So I had my first interior design job and I was working for a firm and I was very new and green and excited. And I remember I did my concept development process for my leadership at the time. And we had a big presentation. And I went to work at 6 a.m. I left at 2 a.m. the next morning. I went home, took a 30-minute nap, laid on the floor, took a shower, went back to the office, and then went and did a presentation to our client. They loved it. But my boss didn't say, take a comp day, leave early. It was just like, keep going. And in that moment, I was like, oh man, is it the industry? Is it me? Or is this firm? And right then I was really, really grounded in my love of practice, my love of design, and I needed to lead with that. So I quit that job and I decided to start my own practice. And I started Determined by Design in 2012. We turned 10 last year, woohoo. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have 6 months of my salary saved up. I didn't have a business plan. But what I did know is I had this unwavering need to continue to build a practice that had leadership that looked like me. And in 2012, there were no interior design firms that had Black leadership. There were no diverse interior design firms. Today, we are the only Black and Indigenous interior design firm in the nation. And that continued to guide me. But one of the things that was also very clear, there were a lot of things that I did not know, and that is how I made so many other decisions. Because I would look at what everyone else was doing, what they did, and I was like, I don't want to do it like that. Do I have to do it like that? No. You have to do it in the path and in the way that feels right and good and integrity-based for you. So, Determined by Design. Remember I just told you I started a business, no salary, no savings, no business plan, and someone approached me to do a nonprofit project. They approached me to do a nonprofit projects for domestic violence survivors. I'm like, okay. I remember telling my mother, she said, you just quit your job, you ain't got no money, and you want to do free work. Yeah! So, This nonprofit project was for domestic violence survivors. It was for 12 women and 32 children in Washington, D.C. And I show up to this meeting very enthusiastic, if you can imagine. And I say, I'm here to provide interior design services for you. And these women look at me like I'm crazy. First, they're like, calm down. Second, they said, we don't need this. This isn't important to our lives right now. And in that moment, this is where love comes into the equation, right? So when things like that happen, are you doing it from a place of ego or from a place of love? So for me, I had to slow down and I had to meet these women where they are. So then we started to have this dialogue about what do they need for their space. And this is the beauty and the humanity of some people. No woman could tell me what she needs, but she could tell me what her neighbor needs. And for me, that was the moment. So we continued to go through the interior design process with them. And it went from we don't need this to, wow, somebody would do this for us. I thought I could only see this stuff on TV. Is this something I could do one day? And when people think about interior design, they often think about the big, pretty reveal, which is a moment. But when we finished this project, a woman walked up to me and she said, Miss Kia, when I walked into this room, I realized change was possible for me. And right then I knew the people who need access to well-designed spaces the most, they don't know they don't have it, they don't know they need it, and they don't have an advocate. So I built my entire business around being that advocate. Now, when you hear the word equity and interior design, they don't really go hand in hand. You hear interior design and you think luxury, you think mid-century modern, you think HGTV. I see purpose, I see passion, and I see profit. The biggest misconception is when I tell people I'm an interior designer, and then when I tell them that we solely focus on affordable and low income and workforce housing. And let me strip that down a little bit. The poor housing, the ghetto, Section 8 housing. Those things don't seemingly go hand in hand. And they automatically assume, are you a nonprofit? Absolutely not. There is profit in leading with your passion and your purpose. We talked briefly about style, right? And when you think about interior design, people often say, what's your design style? What's your style? What do you do? What's your aesthetic? And sometimes we hear it in architecture. We'll hear our architectural partners say, the client wanted a modern building. Well, what does that mean? Style is about ego. Business 101, people buy into people. So how are we a profitable interior design business in the affordable and low-income housing space? We lead, we design, we search, and we advocate for the story of people and communities. So what does that look like? One of the things that Shane did is he gave an acknowledgement to the indigenous land that we're on. But the number one thing that makes Determined by Design successful is not only our diversity, but we also search for the story of the community. We can acknowledge it, but then we can also use it as a launch pad to create every single design decision that we make. And how do we do that? We start with historical research and context of the land, not the site. The site is a construct. The site is purchase. The land is the inhabitants of those peoples and of those tribes that we acknowledge at every step of the way in our design process. And in order for us to do that, we have to do the research. Now, if you work in a traditional architecture or design firm, you know when the client wants that deliverable, sometimes you got to skip the steps. That is unacceptable. You have to start here. We go from the indigenous story, then we go to contemporary history of every community. Who are the makers, artisans, craftsmen, people, organizations? How do you engage them into the design process? That is really critical to what we do. Our next component, we then look at to the community. As an interior design firm, a big part of our practice is literally going into the community, meeting with the community members. And we also really think about our language. We don't say the people, the community. It is us, the people, right? So we use a lot of unifying language in this process. So after we do this deep dive, this research, then we get to our concepts. And for us at Determined by Design, a concept is a prayer. It's an intention. It is a way we choose to approach a project with this idea of prayer, love, intentionality that's rooted in the community story. So what does that sound like? Conjuring ripe heirlooms. This is a project that we did in Miami, Florida. And we did, what was really fascinating is the history and contextual information that we find, the actual real estate developer didn't even know. The architect didn't even know. And this is where the disconnect happens. If all the disciplines aren't searching for the story, then we are not moving in unison. You also start to see imagery that is visceral, it is dynamic. It's not other people's interiors. It's not other buildings to say, I can make your building look like that. It is specific. This is the launch pad to every design decision, texture, shape, the smell, all things that we do. But again, it is this kind of notion of being majestic, abundance, oneness. It's the visual component of literally images that allow people to see themselves abstracted and then turned into design elements. This is the process, and I tell people all the time, this is why I've been in business for 10 years. When the housing developer says to me, Kia, we've never used an interior designer on projects before. When the architect says to me, Kia, real estate developers don't use interior designers on affordable housing. When the GC says, oh my God, you're making it too nice for these people. What are they inherently saying? They are saying that they are less deserving based solely off of those socioeconomic standing. And just like those 12 women, depending on where I am in America, those communities look like me. We are inherently saying people of color deserve less than. And this is why I touch a lot about love. Because you gotta feel it to fight for it. And what I often find is, I was having this conversation last night where someone says, what's your biggest obstacle? I said, sometimes it's my architectural counterpart. And they was like, but why? Now let's imagine for a second. Architecture, still predominantly white men, and here comes a young black girl saying, do better. You haven't done good enough. Your finishes are trash. The building is ugly. There is no concept. There is no story. I'm not leading from a place of ego. I'm leading from a place of empathy. Softness, decoration, adornment, beauty is critical to health, safety, and welfare. But we don't think about it that way. And it matters because if I didn't feel it, if it didn't take me back to that feeling in that tent, if it didn't take me back to how I felt when I walked into my first prison, then I wouldn't push. I wouldn't fight. Because what really matters when we think about it is, what do you want to do with your time on this earth? How do you want to impact people's lives? There's often this notion of work-life balance. It is an illusion. It is just life. It is just service. It is about impacting people's lives, community, and the work that we do. It often requires us to be making sure that we are healed as service providers, as creatives. And it might be like, oh, kid, does my healing really matter? Yes, it does. Find me a time where you haven't been in a conversation with a constituent where there wasn't some type of underlying bias or apparent bias or racism or inequity or injustice that was being spoken. Did you feel the need to speak up? Were you afraid? oh, well, I can't say that. That person has a higher title than me. The healing of self matters so you can constantly show up and serve others. That is why it matters. I'll give you a story because I love a good story. One time we were working on a project and the partner, and we say partners, we don't say clients, the partner wasn't really getting it. And honey, I cursed them out. And I didn't even use no curse words. That's how bad of a cussing it was. And I had to check myself because that wasn't about them. That was about me. And when you do work to serve people and communities, if you can't show up, hold, and heal, then the mission gets lost. When you personalize it, well, I feel, I, the work gets lost because we are in service to others through design. We are, and we forget that. I often say the love language of design is service. And in a time where we're trying to be so heady, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a service provider. And I'm okay with that. I just happen to serve people through interior design. If you would have asked that little girl at the beginning of the slide deck if I would have been an interior designer and a business owner when I was a solid C student, never in a million years. But it was my purpose. It was my path. It is how I lead with empathy every single day in every project. And I question, is this good enough for my grandmother, my loved one, my brother, my sister? And I feel like the disconnect is in our industry as it still lacks diversity. If we don't see people who look like us building and developing, designing communities, then I need my counterparts to still have an empathetic lens and create the communities that don't mirror them in the same way that they would be for their loved ones. You hear me say this a lot. We are not a luxury interior design firm. I am anti-luxury. Luxury is illusion. The minute it is mass-produced, it is no longer a luxury. So we check people all the time. Oh, your spaces, they look so luxurious. No, they're elevated, they're empathetic, and they have the stories of people rooted into them. I am very anti-luxury, but always pro-people. I want to remind you very clearly that service starts with you. Whatever that looks like, it's going to look different for everyone, but the impact of what we do day in and day out, it has to start with you. And that comes with some weight. I teach my students that the spaces that we create today will impact 4 generations of families. It's a good read, but it's a dry read. The Color of Law. Has anyone read that book? Yeah, right, dry read. I wish they would put it on Audible. But I remember reading that book, and they talked about that it will take 4 generations of families to undo the systematic injustice around housing that our government has created. So when we think about whether you're designing the office space, the hotel, the community center, the decisions that we make will dictate how people feel when they move in and out of that space. In affordable housing, one of the things that we always hear when we're doing affordable housing is, we need to keep our eyes on the door. We need to watch everyone as they're coming in. We need security cameras. And it's such an inhumane experience to think that when I walk into my home, I need to be watched. Could you imagine if your son or your daughter was coming home after school and they were policing them as soon as they walk into the front door? So our job is to challenge those biases that show up every single day, unrelentlessly, unwavering, but also we need to do it in unison and in partnership. And I say partnership because think about your partners in real life. If your boo, your spouse, if they do some fuck shit, you're gonna correct them, right? But I think what happens in our industry, oh, well, that's the client. We can't correct the client. We can't correct the funding source. But yes, you can. Because just like in real life where you would course correct your partner and you would educate them, that is your job. But you have to see them as people with blind spots and biases, but also you really have to remember you are in service to the community, not the people who stroke the checks. I had an architect once say, well, Kia, we can't bite the hand that feeds us. I bite it all the time and it keeps coming back. Because at our core, as a firm, as a practice, as beings, we are determined by design. Thank you. This QR code has some treats for you all graphically, if you feel so inclined. You ready, partner? You ready? Hey!
Give another round of applause for Kia. Is everyone inspired? A little more energy. Is everyone inspired? Awesome. I'm going to actually start, or in the next 15, 20 minutes, talk about a few confessions. Don't worry, they're not personal confessions. They're confessions as my life as an urban designer for the last 20, 25 years. And the first one, people. People make places. Great design helps. Great planning helps. But be it the markets of Marrakesh, or the streets in Europe, or closer home in downtown Oklahoma City, or even when it's super cold, and you don't know what super cold is till you experience the ice show festival in Winnipeg. People create places. Places are wonderful experiences where you can dance with your loved one, and maybe not so loved one. And what the last few years of COVID have taught us is Zoom or other virtual meetings were great places to connect and stay connected, but they didn't really create community. And let's be honest, some tried very hard to stay connected, and some were truly never there. But let's not blame COVID, because being physical does not create a community. So we have started to experience, and we have been experiencing places in different ways, at least for the last 10, 15 years. And you experienced Tiger Woods in 2003 like this. Look how people experienced Tiger Woods in 2018. That's how we experience and build memories. Let's just be honest with ourselves on that. So we need a reason, be it coming to Bricktown in Oklahoma City or experiencing Juneteenth in Tulsa. Give us a reason to be there, to create a place, and we will help create a place. It could just be a stroll with your children. That's part of being in a great place. And yes, we need cars. Some of us need cars to access great places. But as we have learned, cars divide communities. And people take their lives into their own hands when they do simple tasks in our neighborhoods. And that's one of the first lessons I learned was as we create beautiful streets, We have to keep into account not just creating sidewalks that heal the spaces that you just saw, but we have to spend more time building crosswalks that connect across streets than building sidewalks where people just walk along them. And you don't have to design your streets just to move people. They should be for living, as the city of Mobile is doing right now with Water Street in downtown. They're making their underutilized median as a grand space that can enjoy a wide variety of activities. Other cities are saying, hey, I've got a big space. Maybe I should grow food for the people who live there so they can afford and have access to affordable food, because that's what's important to us as a community. And one thing I've learned, and I learned clearly working with not just this city of Greensboro, which is a leader, of course, in the sit-ins that happened in Woolworth and started a national monument, was that we continue to exclude when we design places. And the two things we exclude the most are children and play. Play that is spiritual, it's not just physical. And that's what we are trying to do when we are thinking and working with the community of Greensboro in designing Church Street that is in front of the Children's Museum. But think of play as play of people for all ages. But also keep in mind that the next time you design a place, think of a place, think of three things you're not, at the very least. A person of a different age, a person of a different income, a person of a different color, and at least of one disability. I was doing a design charrette in a city that will not be named with the greatest streetscape architects, and we were doing design charrettes, designing 4 different streets in the city. And when they came to present, I asked them, I have one last request. Before you present your wonderful designs, you have to start your design by saying, either I'm in a wheelchair and I have designed the most wonderful place because, or I use a cane and this is the most amazing place, and see how you describe your design and how you have envisioned your design. That becomes critical. Kia talked eloquently about healing. And sometimes when we are making places, we should think about healing spaces. And it's more about placekeeping and thinking about places that have been scarred. In the name of progress, we created urban renewal that destroyed so many of our neighborhoods. This being the case of the Hemisphere neighborhood in San Antonio, where pre-1960s and post-1960s, it changed. So a wonderful neighborhood of Lavaca and Hemisphere with wonderful mix of uses, a great community became a place of Hemisphere 68, an international exposition that brought hundreds and thousands and millions of people, but created scars that will last not just one lifetime, but has lasted 50 years, and it will take a number of years to heal them. So what do we do? How do we begin to heal that, to create a place? And look at these streets, like Alamo Street out here, working with the community, asking what they wanted. They said, first of all, this is in downtown. Design it for locals, not for the tourists. So I can walk, I can bike, I can drive. Number 2, what if the street could change? Does it always have to remain the same? When they are tourists, they come, they use the space, but then I want the street back for me. Can I use it for other things and other uses too? And 3, and they were adamant about it, we like our streets where we can dance. That would be a successful street. And that's what we began about 10 years ago, working with them, learning with them, is starting to bring back the first set of streets that were destroyed. And these are streets that are flexible. They have no curbs. Curbs that prevent people from becoming part of a community. They can become festival areas by just taking out 3 bollards. And yes, people do dance on them, or in this case, Zumba, every Saturday morning and whenever they want to, because that's what a street should allow us to do. And of course, celebrate festivals, including Diwali, which for me is something very personal because it's the biggest Hindu festival. But all of these streets also change the paradigm of what we think streets should be. They incorporate stormwater planters. They improve the air quality. They improve the stormwater quality before it goes into the San Antonio River, which is just 2 blocks away. And it has had a huge impact, which is being monitored and measured. It has improved the air quality, reduced the temperature on peak hot days in June by 7 to 12 degrees. And most importantly, it has ensured that more than or nearly 85% of people who visit this area, who use this area, are locals and not tourists. The tourists are well invited, but the best places are designed for locals, and the tourists come in too. And it has also encouraged new businesses to come up and set up different shops and build the entrepreneurial spirit that is there in San Antonio. And for every dollar that has been invested by the public, by the city, it has got over $7 back in private investment. And this is not just happening in San Antonio. There are studies after studies that talk about how placemaking is so critical in actually helping us, not just economically, but culturally and physically too. So then, why do we still design places for tourists? And let's not even talk about the hipsters out here. But it is so important that we think about the place and the spirit of the place. When we started designing and working with the community in San Antonio, the Payaya Indians taught us about what is San Antonio. And they said, before there was San Antonio, there was Yanaguana. Yanaguana was the spirit of the blue panther that when the Ahinga bird came to drink water, it flew off. And when it flew and it spread its wing, drops of water landed all over the place. And that's what created life for people to live in Yanaguana, which is now called San Antonio. And that act of creation, that act of love is something that the elders told us to keep in mind in everything we do in terms of saving all the beautiful trees that have wonderful energy and spirits to them, but also keeping in mind the landscaping, the intentionality of creating each and everything that we put on our streets or we put in the park has a meaning and a purpose and evokes joy. Joy that is play, and not play that is just a physical reaction that we have to things. And it is used and experienced by people of all ages. But I have to be honest, we can spend a lot of time designing, but there are a number of places, not just in our country, but everywhere else, that no longer have the luxury of time. They are going to get flooded, and they are going to be eradicated. The Chehalis community, which is a native indigenous community that has lived in Washington for hundreds of years, they are in danger of either having a dam that will destroy where they have lived for hundreds of years, or be flooded, which would again destroy their land. And so working with them, learning with them what options they would like to see to help sustain, which does not include a big thing that totally changes how they have lived all their lives, is to look at each and every space. It may be a sidewalk, it may be a parking lot, and rethinking their purpose and their need as something that can be used as an open space, but when it rains and it floods, there is a place for water to travel. There is a place for us to live with the water and the unknowns that we don't know will happen in the next few decades of our lifetime. And that's something that other cities where we have been working in the city of Seattle has also been thinking about. So thinking that we forget the ego, but also keeping in mind that we don't know everything that is going to happen tomorrow. So we can be humble and try our best, but the nature will always take its course and make sure that we live with nature as much as possible. In all the work that we have done, we have tried to make one thing sure. We go to people, we listen to people, we hear what they want them. And if there's another request I have for you, is if you design a street, don't do it in a room. Stand in the middle of the road or the neighborhood that you're trying to do and design it that way, and you'll see some of the best ideas that come up. Don't expect people to come to you. In all our engagement, we come in an auditorium and say, can you come between 9 and 12? And they're like, we have 2 jobs. We don't have time for your 9 to 12 meeting. Or you could come in the evening. I have to cook for my children. When am I supposed to come and cook in the evening? Go to people. Go to where they walk, they work, they live, they play. Don't expect people to come to you, and you will hear much better feedback than you have heard before. Feedback that actually builds on what people want, as opposed to what designers think we think they need. And make sure you work with children. The children have the best ideas, and I have shamefully stolen lots of ideas from them most of my life. Once I let my ego go and realized they came up with the best ideas, I was like, this is a free opportunity. I'm going to take as many ideas as possible. They do. We just have to become good facilitators and good designers to make those ideas happen. And test them. As designers, we don't know what will always work and not work. Sometimes it will, sometimes it will not. But only if we start to test different ideas, especially in open spaces, we will know what will work. And we should not be afraid of failure, because that's part of how we will learn what and how to create great places. The one thing I have learned, and I hope you all are keeping count of the number of confessions I've made, but the one thing I have clearly learned working in different cities across the country is that the most underprivileged areas have the most number of problems. Even in one of our largest cities, the city of Houston, where the orange colors that you see are the under-resourced areas, the vulnerable areas, where 6 in 10 people in Houston live, and they only form a small part of the city. They have 80% of the fatalities and accidents. They have 30% of the city's sidewalks. They have the most heat island impacts and the least tree cover. And nearly all of these areas are going to be impacted by the 100-year, forget the 500-year flood. And as we know, the 100-year flood is becoming the 10-year flood now. So what do we do? Because there are not enough designers either in this room or in our entire world to solve all of these problems in neighborhoods in Houston, or a similar neighborhood which is known as the Iron Triangle neighborhood in the city of Richmond, which, as you can see, the Iron Triangle is because it's choked by 3 rail tracks. But it's a community, despite all the challenges, has been standing, is resilient, has been fighting every day to not just strive but thrive. And it's a neighborhood that about a decade ago was one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in our entire country. And you could see it as you just walked on it. You could not miss the bullet holes. And the city tried a number of things, including building a park through federal grants. And they said, look, we built you a great park. Do you know how long it lasted? All of 4 days before it was burned down. So, please keep in mind, you may have the world's best intention of creating the greatest design, but if it is not accepted by the community, it is meaningless, it is purposeless. So instead, the Pogo Park nonprofit organization said, let's start to ask the people, before we design for them, what do you want? And guess what? Who are the best persons to come up with great ideas? They walked every street. The city said, hey, we would like to build a great sidewalk here on this with beautiful trees. You're going to love and enjoy, you're going to enjoy it. And the kids were like, I'm not going to walk on the streets. I never walk on the streets. Have you walked on the streets? But it looks great on a map. Look, this GIS analysis shows it's the best. It's the straightest route. And they were like, you have never come to our neighborhood. You can continue with your GIS analysis and your mapping. These are the streets that we walk. Design that for us. And none of the streets that were presented by the so-called experts were actually the streets that the community wanted improved. So believing in the community became a key critical idea, and the kids called it yellow brick route. I asked them a couple of times. They said, it's the yellow brick route and we like it. And that's what we now call it, is the yellow brick route. And as the city is designing to create that yellow brick route, with the people who thought of it, not just at the very beginning, but all through the design of each and every sidewalk, every crosswalk, every bioswale, they made sure that each and every person living on those streets was contacted. And their stories were told. Before the visions for the new park, which is the Emplay lot, was created, before the street design was created, it was created based on what the community said is important to them. But then, more importantly, it was what they said they will help build, and they will help maintain, and they will, as a result, get living wage jobs that will help 17 different families who all live in the neighborhood and are not consultants who design it, build it, and then go away. And they are living it as we speak right now. And they are maintaining it. And they are naming each and every tree. That, by the way, is Betsy, if you have not met her. She's a beautiful oak tree that will get beautiful with age too. And much has changed. The kid you saw in the yellow vest, Brandon, he's now a dad with a beautiful daughter. And Miss Carmen, who made sure that her community deserved everything that the community deserved, passed away last month. But the legacy she and others in the community have created will last not just their generation, but the next few generations too. Thank you.
First off, thank you guys for having me. Let's get another round of applause for our other two speakers this morning. Incredible. All right, I am Allison Quinlan, and I wear a lot of hats in the pursuit of a fairly simple goal. I run a multidisciplinary design practice called Flintlock LAB, that's landscape architecture and building. I run a new construction infill development company called Flintlock Development, a historic preservation and general contracting company called Matchlock Limited, and a shared services cooperative called Valkyrie Design Co-op that supports women in design and construction. I'm also a class of 2008 College of Architecture graduate, so boomer sooner. This is my first time back on campus since graduation, and it's been amazing to see what you guys have done since then. I am also a full-time single mom to 2 kids under age 4. So if it looks like I haven't gotten a lot of sleep, it's because I haven't in several years. So the OU College of Architecture did prepare me well for my working life in that way too. As my intro mentioned, I grew up on a big cattle ranch in western Oklahoma in Roger Mills County. I'm the 7th generation to run cattle on the high plains out there. But paradoxically, I work almost exclusively to build lovable, walkable cities and towns. Nationally, rapid population growth in cities that weren't historically dense, places like Austin, Portland, Raleigh, right, Oklahoma City, are eating up some of our most beautiful and productive landscapes, likely, largely with sprawl pattern development. The lower the density of the development that we allow, the more land area we're eating up as we provide those units and those uses. So I've dedicated my firm to making density lovable and livable. If we can develop at 2 or 3 times the density we would otherwise have done, we can save 2 or 3 times the land area from development. After graduate school and several years of practice in DC, I was somewhat suddenly relocated to Northwest Arkansas. And I often say, and this is especially true as an Oklahoman, that the worst thing about living in Arkansas is having to say out loud to people that you live in Arkansas. It is otherwise an absolutely fabulous place to live, although unfortunately word has gotten out. Fayetteville, where I am in Northwest Arkansas, has led the nation, top 5 places to live most of the last 10 years. We beat out places like Seattle, like Portland, much to the chagrin of their mayors who have tweeted some hate to us. And we continue to gain new residents at a really rapid clip. We are having a hard time keeping up. Like most places though, we are controlled by an explicitly racially motivated exclusionary zoning, right? It has our housing production in an absolute stranglehold. The supply and demand mismatch has resulted in a 120% increase in our housing costs in the last 10 years. Let me say that again for the people in the back. We still have a city controlled by explicitly racist and classist zoning policies, likely just like you. Our housing costs have gone up 120% in 10 years. We'll talk more about that supply and demand locally, and if you're interested more in the zoning history, you can check out an ongoing in-depth essay series that I'm co-authoring in the Southern Urbanism Quarterly about the history of our zoning, which is probably relatively similar to yours. And it may sound like I'm being hard on my city here. I want to assure you that the town I live in is actually best case scenario in terms of educated planners who care, incredible city leadership, elected officials, planning documents that support absolute best practices in redevelopment areas. Look at goal 1, right? Infill development and attainable housing, top priority, the highest priority in the city. Cool, so let's check out how well that's going for us. Here's downtown. It doesn't even register on the map. And I do need to get updated maps. That was 2010 to 2015. I started a practice in 2015 and work almost exclusively in that downtown area. So this is a map of the projects that I've worked on in downtown Fayetteville since 2015. And the Incremental Development Alliance, which I serve as a board member and senior faculty member of, preaches deeply the find your farm model of development, where you live and work in one concentrated neighborhood for decades. And I'm single-minded in the pursuit of making our city more walkable, lovable, and livable. So I take on any project that supports that goal. Those range from adaptive reuse of vacant buildings for restaurants. In this case, one of these is a locally owned natural foods co-op that's been owned by residents of the city since the 1970s. We moved them from a suburban sprawl location back downtown into an empty building. We work on new construction infill housing, usually in really unusual formats. We do streamside restoration in downtown parks, low-impact development streetscapes, and historic preservation. In building our community, I'm always attempting to provide the product the market needs rather than the product the market knows how to produce, and those are almost never the same thing. The average household size in the US is 2.5 people. That number is driven by a dramatically expanding population of adults who live alone and a dramatically shrinking number of households with children. There are a couple of takeaways from this data that we'll talk about. The first one to think about is that as our average household size shrinks, we need twice as many individual homes or units to house the same population that we did when the average household size was 4 people. Most of our country is zoned on a rule of units per acre. So think about what the impact of what that density cap means, as we need twice as many units to house the same population plus population growth. 36 million American households are one person living alone. That's about 1/3 of households. The numbers are higher in cities, with American cities having more like 50% of households comprised of a single person living alone. And a large secondary percentage of that is 2 people living together. Sometimes that's a couple, sometimes that's roommates, sometimes that's a single parent living with a single child. But 1 and 2 person households are the majority of households in America. Those households are a wide range of ages, although they skew into retirement, and as the householder age gets older, they also skew significantly female. So that has a major impact on design for these households, with a necessary focus on female buyers and the ability to age in place. This data is widely available, and it's a long-term trend that is not appearing to reverse. But despite that, there's very little intentional design for the market for this majority demographic. Instead, the vast majority of housing is designed for a minority of the market, with 82% of our existing housing stock being built with more than 3 bedrooms. There are more 5-bedroom houses in America than there are 1-bedroom houses. So we're wasting significant amounts of resources, land disturbance, construction materials, on building homes that are completely out of scale to the market and to our household sizes. And we haven't always built this way, right? Let's keep that in mind. The original Levittown house was 750 square feet. It had 1 closet, and it was designed as a family home. So what does lovable density look like? It's not this. Not very lovable, generally. Not very achievable for most American cities or towns. It might be this, conceptually, although we're gonna need a lot of headway on zoning codes and fire code and federal finance regulations to get anywhere close to this. So in Northwest Arkansas, it can look like this. Several of these projects have densities of 20 to 24 units an acre, which is equivalent to a large apartment complex. They're certainly not, that 100% impervious, that 100% density that we see in an Italian hill town, but we're starting to get there within the rules that we have. Let's dig deeper into a couple of these and look at what it looks like designing households for the households that we have under the rules that we have. That's one of the big things that really controls our work. We have the realities of how we finance these, how the buyers finance them at purchase, right? Construction in America is entirely based on federal regulations and underwriting. And if we ignore that, we can come up with the best designs on paper possible that are going to be completely useless to the market. So location matters for us. This is a typical 50 by 150 infill lot. It's across the street, though, from the Fayetteville Senior Center and a community garden and a 74-acre park. The long corner lot allowed us to, we had some downsides. It's a 50-foot wide lot. We lost 18 feet of that buildable width to utility easements because we were along a street. So we had a buildable depth of less than 28 feet. But it did allow us to turn those units to front onto the long side of the street. So they're platted on fee simple lots. That means that you can buy one with a traditional 30-year secondary market mortgage. To those of you who that seemed like Greek, can we get a hand raise on how many of you have ever bought a house? Most of you. Oklahoma, good homeownership rates, all right? So what you went into a bank and got was a federally insured secondary market mortgage. We talk about that as a secondary market because it can be resold. Who's heard of mortgage-backed securities? They're having a real moment right now, right? Again, they're often so exciting. So in order for mortgages to be federally insured, they have to meet very strict underwriting guidelines. That means the product itself is very controlled. There are very specific statutes that need to be met, and even if you meet underwriting guidelines, you need to be able to meet appraisal guidelines, right? So both of these things have to be really considered as important as building code in terms of how novel forms of housing are designed. So these specifically are what we call a pantry duplex. So these, by a quirk in zoning code, needed to be a duplex townhouse in order to be built on a lot size of less than 1,800 square feet. So you'll notice that little hyphen between the units. That gives us a connection of those units with a 4-foot wide by 8-foot tall firewall. That's one sheet of 5/8" Type-X gyp. So we've got the smallest possible amount of the most expensive form of that construction. We've set the property lines in between the units with a use easement so that each unit has a parking space to one side of the house. But because the property lines are not directly on the unit wall, none of the walls have to be fire rated, and we can have windows on all of the walls. This is what I mean about you're playing Tetris with all of these interlacing rules. The houses are designed for 1 or 2 people, so the front stoops are small, enough for a simple bench. You can sit outside, you can get someplace to receive your Amazon packages, and it's just enough of a garden to make gardening a cute hobby and not a chore. We've since built this floor plan 15 more times in a variety of floor formats. The most interesting one, I think, do I have anybody from Fayetteville here? All right, we've got one. Hello. Since we don't have anyone from our planning office here, I'll say out loud, we have one that we've built as an ADU, and it was sold as a 1-unit condo association, separately from the front house. No one's noticed yet, and no one's died. We expected, and we were right, that the buyers would be predominantly single females. We've had a couple of couples who live in the homes. They also, are fine. We've had no divorces out of our 1-bedroom, 1-bath house that we know of so far. But the thing that's really great about these is in those variety of formats that we built them, cottage clusters, pocket neighborhoods, ADUs, townhouses, the mortgage payment on this 1-bedroom house that you can buy with a 30-year insured mortgage is less than half of what you would pay for a 1-bedroom apartment. So it makes homeownership rates possible for a demographic downtown that otherwise does not have access to those downtown amenities. It meets federal guidelines, again, for being able to build credit, for being able to build wealth in this house. It is a totally unusual format that we had to market as a tiny house. Right? You have to think about the way that buyers will perceive these. So quick project stats. Keep in mind that these units sold for what was considered an astronomical price per square foot when they first went on the market. But they are the most affordable purchase price new construction home downtown. They're one of the most affordable homes of any age or condition downtown. The major lesson here is to build small, right? The house is nice, but it's little. The lot is well designed, it's tiny. We're aiming for lovable efficiency, right? We have to make it worthwhile to people to live in a format that is using less resources. That means we need to make it better. So let's look at one more. The next project is one that I designed and developed. This is the project that made me be able to put developer on my business card. We just finished the 3rd phase of homes, and you can see more photos and details of this project at southstreetcottages.com. I bought this 1.5-acre parcel that's 6 blocks from downtown in 2016, a year after I went out on my own. The site has an average grade of 15%. That's one fun thing about Fayetteville that we didn't really get a lot of in Oklahoma City. We've got a 30-foot drop from that back corner down to the street in the front. This is where being both a landscape architect and an architect comes in very useful. We have a lot of grading plans that we do in detail. This project was really a PhD in development and also in a real school of hard knocks in terms of being able to develop things that I design and afford them. As a development laboratory, the project intentionally has a lot of different housing variety, formats. The first 9 houses along the street are complete. The 3-story walk-up bodega in the corner here, which I will admit is an idea I stole from children. They pointed out there's a community center at the end of the street, we'll see in a little bit. They have a really great after-school program, and through our work with them, kids pointed out that the only place they had to go to get a snack was a vending machine at the outside of the motorcycle shop across the street from us. And so we, looking through historic maps, saw that there had always been a little grocery store or bodega at this corner. And so have the goal of putting that back. We're gonna do a 3-story walk-up with a little bodega, 12 townhouses on the interior court, as soon as my second child's in kindergarten and interest rates are no longer 8%. So building smaller than normal houses, the key here really is you can't make everything mediocre. You can't just scale it all down a little. You've got to steal space from some places. Note that little dining room nook that's tucked out onto the front porch so that we don't actually have a freestanding dining table, so that you can fit normal size furniture. You have to include a few really special details in each house, but most of the materials are very basic and consistent among all the homes. One thing that we also really have to do is convince our subcontractors and our general contractors that it's the same size as the 5,000 square foot custom that we're competing with for their time. It's just spread out over 3 rooftops. So using consistent materials across the 3 projects also really helps significantly with that. As the only developer, designer of this project, I can also really maximize the ability to fully design them. The architecture, the gardens, the site, they're all designed for constructability, for marketability, and for financeability. We've been able to market test ideas like an ADU on a spec house before we convince clients that it's a really good idea. We can take them and walk them around. I will say this unit, I could do probably a whole talk just on this unit. It's the Arkansas side yard, so it's modeled after a Charleston side yard, except, we're Arkansas. We're not quite as fancy as Charleston's. We can't afford the big fancy double gallery porch. We, though, were able to design this specifically to underwriting standards. The addition of that $200 door between the stair up to the garage apartment and the garage itself allows you to not go inside. You don't have to go outside to go back inside, which means the entire unit can be appraised as one big single-family home or as a duplex, depending on which comps work better in your market. It's almost always one big single-family house. So we can sort of cheat the way that this is appraised in order to make it work. The number of buyers for this type of unit is small. So for my small developers out there, this is an enormously great way to get double the density on your lot and to have the single best performing rental unit we've ever built. It is harder because you're getting to a larger square footage, larger total price point to find a buyer for a spec house designed like this. That's when we came up with the condo association idea on a future project. So one thing I want you to really notice here is how fast this product value is appreciating. This is where that 120% really becomes visible in housing costs. And our construction costs have more than doubled from that first phase, right? So the price, the price appreciation just generally in our market is staggering and is making the entire city relatively unaffordable for anyone who's from there. Community building, though, is at the heart of this work, right? We can get into lots of code and nuts and bolts, but at the end of the day, we are designing this not just for our residents, but for their neighbors too. So part of the secret sauce of this project, and of my brand generally, is what we call CAF development, right? So all of it has a really high cute as fuck rating. And I was appreciative as we started out that Kia really broke that boundary for me, because I wasn't totally sure I was gonna have the guts to go there and fully explain it, but I thought you'd get it anyway. People are so used to really boring, ugly projects that if you do literally anything that's slightly nicer, they will forgive a multitude of sins like lack of covered parking. We don't have your hail. I don't recommend that in your market. No coat closets, no powder rooms, right? You just have to make it slightly nicer. Build things that people like. I know that feels strange to need to say out loud, but it is a lesson that is dramatically missing from design and development right now. Build things for people. So as an infill developer, also, we do need you to make some money so that you don't become a former developer, because you can't invest in your community if you've gone broke. So as part of the South Street Cottages development, I've done an ongoing set of programs with that neighborhood community center that's a couple doors down. We work with the kids to teach them about design and development, to teach them about stormwater, to teach them about zoning, how cities are built, how cities are made. We also have included them in some of our cutest community engagement sessions, almost all of which include livestock, which I think is probably a tie-in from my time in Oklahoma. This was a community engagement meeting that was hosted. We have a group of goats called the greedy goats that will come and eat your invasive species off your site. And that year, the goats had a large number of kids. And so we had a pop-up petting zoo where kids could come and play with the kids. And we handed out natural fruit popsicles from a little business that's in the neighborhood, and did a series of design interventions, working with neighbors and with our community school kids. So you have a responsibility with infill development to make the neighborhood that you have inherited better, way beyond the bounds of your site, right? This is a 50 feet north of South Street Cottages site, and it's a public park that's become the centerpiece of that essay series in the Southern Urbanism Quarterly. It has a really unpleasant history, and hopefully a slightly better future. But one of the after-school kids that we were working with was hit by a car on his bike one day, headed into the center, and he's okay. But we did take that as a real need to fix this absolutely fucked traffic pattern in this. We had a stop sign in one direction, a yield sign in another direction, and absolutely no controls in the downhill direction. So there were a series of accidents at this intersection over a number of years, and no one thought it was fixable. So we just went and asked. We drew a series of coloring book pages of crosswalks for the kids. We let them design the crosswalks and vote to see which one was their favorite, got volunteers to paint them, and then went to city council and asked for money for stop signs and new curbs and redevelopment. Sometimes it's about asking, and sometimes it's also about using the privilege of it feels very different when I show up at city council and ask for money than if the neighbors had done so. And so some of this is about using your own abilities and your own superpowers to do good for other people. And it can also take years to develop trust with your neighbors to figure out what's really going on in the neighborhood, right? Those first initial meetings can be great. You can dive in. I also agree when we want feedback, we always say we have to feed people for feedback, right? We give them dinner, tell them to bring their kids at night. It can take years of that to really start to dig into what are the big picture problems. That's often not a quick fly-by-night thing that you can get day one, right? The trust is not there. People have asked over and over again, what's wrong? How can we help? And then done nothing. And so there are huge stretches of community that don't really want to tell you again what the problem is just to have nothing happen. So the benefit of working long-term in a place is you can start to develop those relationships and trust to let them know that something will happen eventually, even if it starts small. So your next effective dose, what's the minimum effective dose that you can do today to make that community better? So final thoughts here. Building cities is about investing in people, right? It's about your tradespeople, it's about your residents, it's about your neighbors, it's about the kids that walk on the sidewalks in front of these projects every day. We are building a framework for people to live in. And so what you need to be focusing on is that framework. It's the people, right? It's the framework for their life. It doesn't even matter how cute it is, as long as you're thinking about them first. Thank you.
Wow. Round of applause again for our phenomenal speakers. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you all so much. I have a quick announcement before I get started. James and Diana Gallagher, there's an item that we found that we have waiting for you at the registration table, so when you get a moment, make sure you hit up the table and get your item. But wow, I'm just still processing and downloading. That was a phenomenal set of presentations, and thank you all so much for really telling these meaningful stories that is helping us, I think, visualize how we can bring these practices back to our communities in tangible ways. So beautiful to hear. And Shane, Ron, and team, I vote that we do a place-making comedy show next because the way y'all had me cracking up over there was just hilarious. You guys were awesome, so thank you guys so much. So I know that everyone in the room is sharing my excitement from what you all shared and the inspiration and hearing you all's stories. And my initial reaction is really thinking through, wow, how much courage it must take for you all to really step into these roles where you're disrupting systems, you're working in complexities every day, and you're really looking and reimagining how we approach this work and supporting and serving our communities. And so I wanted to start off by just asking, how does courage show up for you? And how do you really stay rooted in your value system when the systems that are surrounding the work that we're doing are almost counterintuitive to that. Like, how does that show up for you, and how do you practice that courage and do the work that you do?
Courage for me is I am in therapy once a week.
Same.
Nothing like that. I think the courage to say that in front of this type of audience, you have to, the complexities and just the brokenness of the system, if you don't fucking scream it out with somebody else, you're gonna lose your mind. So I think therapy, I have a great team that speaks the same language and the ethos, so I think it's surrounding yourself with like-minded people. And when I say like-minded, it also might mean they look different than me, but you have to surround yourself with a community who wants to unapologetically do the work and make the money second.
Beautiful, thank you. Mukul, Allison?
I think one of the things that is, sort of two-part that I've been thinking about too, in terms of the trauma of space that so many people have been impacted by, the trauma of decades of racial segregation and redlining and what that's meant for housing and neighborhoods and the lack of trees that we see, right? There's trauma in this for people. And so I think some of that is being brave in recognizing that this is a deep and hard thing to work in every day. And therapy helps. And also you just, you have to get comfortable. You have to get comfortable yelling at people. As a pretty conflict-averse person, that is hard for me, but the number of times that I'm on the phone with a city engineer yelling about something is higher now than I would have guessed when I graduated college.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Do you feel like because you're a woman, they're often taken aback that you're yelling at them?
I think it's more effective. I think there is something that is hard about you being a woman in this profession. I think it would be silly to say that that's not the case, right? I have a construction company and I'm often on job sites, and so much of what I'm doing is trying to make spaces that feel safer for people, because so much space in our country right now just doesn't feel safe for people. Doesn't feel safe for kids to be on sidewalks next to high-speed traffic. Doesn't feel safe for women to be out at night. It doesn't feel safe for people to say what they really think. We've kind of lost the ability to disagree. And so as we try to make spaces safer, I think it's been helpful in some ways to be able to be emotionally intelligent and use what really is not, use feminine skills of ego balance and emotions. And, in some ways it's harder, and in some ways I think it's easier to get yelled at by a young woman than an old man sometimes.
And what I
guess we could ask
Being
him.
able to work through the uncomfortable conversations is what I'm hearing, yes.
Courage for me, I would say, is knowing fully well I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to learn from my mistakes. And I guess one thing I learned long time ago was to ask questions and go on asking them till you understand, even if it irritates people. I still ask a lot of questions. So just learning and not being afraid to make mistakes. Don't make a mistake once you've built a street, that's too late. But in the process of designing it, you may. And just learning from that always helps.
Thank you for that insight. So I want to move into a design-oriented question, and just really thinking about design, as you all just so eloquently articulated, is really this almost emotionally rooted practice. It's a problem-solving tool that really requires a lot of internal work and self-reflection and being able to show up as your whole self so you can wholly serve communities. And I love, Kia, how you mentioned it being a service. It's a service that we are providing to communities through our roles as practitioners. But not all of us in the room have really been trained up as designers. And I think sometimes when it comes into our different practices, it can be difficult to take what feels like an abstract sort of framework and distill it down into what we can actually do through the work that we're doing in our respective roles. And so from a design thinking perspective, can you all further elaborate on the inclusive design process as a framework and how we can make that a tangible part of the work that we're doing in this ecosystem building for communities? How do we sort of create these guideposts, if you will, of thinking about design in a tangible way that we can support our communities through?
I think I briefly mentioned it, but I always start with any process by admitting all the biases I'm going to bring to this project. It's just the reality of it. And then really push myself and my whole team to really overcome those biases with a purpose, to create a better place that is truly inclusive. But, I focus more on streets and neighborhoods and parks from that perspective, and how people react to places is very different than the way I do. I still remember I was designing a street in Berkeley. It had been 6 months. We had done multiple community engagement forums, and there was a gentleman who used to show up like every third meeting, and every time I used to ask him, like, what do you like about this street? And he used to always say, because I can walk on the street. And I was like, okay, I wrote it down, walking on the street. And it was only after the third time he took me aside and he told me, do you understand what I mean when I say I can actually walk on this street in the great progressive city of Berkeley, that this is the only street I feel comfortable walking? Is because even in that city, a liberal bastion, he could be profiled, he could be stopped, and it's the only street he lets his children actually walk. So I thought the street was really ugly. I lived 2 blocks from that street, and I totally didn't understand that it was actually a great safe street for some people, and for me, it was a really ugly street. So just overcoming those biases and understanding what's not working helps.
Thank you.
Tangible for me is I think about who is required for the project and/or development. What are the disciplines? And I think they're inherent ones: civil, structural, MEP. Then you get the optional ones: interior, landscape architecture, the green sustainability consultant, the lighting designer. You should start with saying, like, do we have all those players at the table at the start of the job? My biggest hurdle is when the developer and the architect says, oh, we're in DD and we're ready for you, but you priced the job 3 times. I'm fucked, right? So you need to have all these disciplines at the start of the job and not worried about, oh, can I cover this fee while I'm doing my feasibility study? When you don't bring them to the table right away, you're screwed. And then also when you're looking at those consultants, look at the community. Look at the demographics of the community. Do your consultants look like the people in the community? If not, find consultants who reflect the communities that you work in. If it doesn't have to be the entire project team, but you do need to make a concerted effort to find these consultants. We needed a landscape architectural consultant and a sustainability consultant, and we went to LinkedIn, and LinkedIn showed you people's photos. So right off the bat, we could look for leadership that was of color in landscape architecture, and we cold call a landscape architect of color by using a very obvious resource like LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thank you. Allison?
I think one thing that we like to think about at the beginning of the project is differentiating between who our stakeholders are and who our users are. So often we end up with, a client who wants us to have a stakeholder committee that is people who are not going to use that project. And so we've really learned to make some good trouble by going to stakeholder meetings and taking very good notes and being very polite and then throwing them away on our way out the door. I can check that box. I will make everyone feel really heard, and then we will design the project around the users. Like, who's this project designed for? And sometimes too, we talk about our streetscape work or our parks work as determining, it's like judging, do we need a bridge here at this river based on how many people are swimming across the river right now? Like, that, it's just not a good way to determine, would a park here be useful? Would sidewalks here be useful? Well, nobody's walking on the street right now. Yeah, because it's 30 feet wide and cars are driving down it at 60 miles an hour in a neighborhood. So some of that too is just figuring out who are the people who would use this if we built it, and how do we find them? I mean, how do we literally go sit on the porch with them and talk to them and then ask them, who else should we talk to? And ask them, who else should we talk to? And then I think too, having that lack of ego of, we're gonna make mistakes, we are not gonna know all the right answers to ask. And sometimes we will get ourselves in a situation where we have a project contract and we realize we don't look the way we should to be designing it. And we'll find a good subconsultant and partner for pieces of it to say, we actually would do a better job at this if we weren't doing it. And so I think some of that is just having that lack of ego of wanting, and some of that's the benefit of working in one place, right? I want the place to be good. I don't care who just does the work. And so I think some of that's just lack of ego and who's your real user.
So good. Checking bias, being inclusive from the start, such great information to really be intentional about how you approach your project team and the project. Thank you all so much. So going into a similar direction when it comes to experiences, and again, I'm talking about these different intangible elements of a community, thinking about happiness and affirmation and these emotional connections that people have to their physical spaces that can be difficult to define and measure, and really thinking about ways to connect that to the physical realm, the physical built environment. And you all, each of you touched so well on this, but we recognize there's really important elements of the built environment that can either trigger positive reactions and experiences in the built environment or negative ones, adverse experiences as well. And so when thinking about the actual physical environment, what elements should we be really focusing in on that could help foster happiness, togetherness, inclusion, that you all might have some insight to share on?
For me specifically, in the realm of what we do around affordable housing, is softness, decoration, adornment, and art. And that sounds very basic, but a lot of times we hear, we can't have any soft seating in this lobby. We can't have any soft seating in the amenity areas. These people will have sex on it. They'll tear it up. And I always kind of say, no one thinks that of the drunk white girl who comes from GW on Capitol Hill, that when she goes to her apartment building that she's gonna tear it up. So I think this idea of softness, art, history, we have a project in DC, it's the Berry Farm redevelopment, and we took all the names of historical figures from the Hillsdale community, and we created this interactive art element where the more people move through the lobby, again to promote movement, the names of historical figures literally illuminate on the wall. So no matter how that community changes and or gentrifies, you still see those hidden figures now illuminated and celebrated throughout the community. And that was an interactive art installation. So I think for me, it's decoration, it's adornment, it's soft textures, not a lot of hardscapes on interiors. Even drapery goes a long way.
My answer also may sound really basic, but did you guys know that people like flowers? Turns out, people love flowers. One of the things that we try to do a lot is have very small front yards, right? We're always trying to really maximize density, even if it's a detached single-family home. And so we try to have a very small amount of front yard, which then means we can be really special with it. Each house can have its own planting palette that's very specific to that house, to the color palette that we've picked for the outside of it. It can be really coordinated, and it's very interesting as you walk along the street that we've got that multi-season. You have something to look at. I think that some of it, again, there's so much of construction and design right now that frankly is so fucking boring. And so just giving something interesting to look at that changes throughout the year, that smells good. We've started incorporating more edibles, that you can, there's rosemary and there's basil and there's tomatoes, and it's tucked into an ornamental landscape so that you get that sensory human experience.
Can I piggyback on that for a second? Absolutely. This same project, we did another senior living project, and we had a yoga room which was underutilized, and what we learned was all the seniors from the building brought all their plants down to the yoga room. So in the next project, we created in the common areas a place it's called Grow Together, and we encourage all the seniors, all the residents to bring some of their indoor plants. Maybe they don't get the best natural light, to the common area so they can grow their plants together, but it's also fostering interaction, community, having a conversation, because people like to grow plants, flowers. It's the little things.
And to that, I would add, one is safety. I've learned the hard way. I think I'm designing a really cool project, but if it may or may not be safe, but if people don't feel safe, then they will not go there. So making it feel safe and be safe is equally important. Multisensorial environments, I think more and more, it may look very cool in the photographs, but I love people if they can touch, maybe they hit the street light or whatever, but people like to be tactile when they experience environments. And, be it growing plants, but, everybody would like in a space, especially in a public space also, everybody, if they want ownership, they will always do one thing, like they'll move their chair just a teeny bit, and then they'll accept the space. So think about it, allowing that flexibility and not everything be so stuck up is a very key important, and allowing that opportunity for people to embrace and make it their own through very small elements is a wonderful way to create an environment.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, how can design be used as a tool to create experiences and foster these interactions where people feel like they have ownership, they can be comfortable, they belong, and can be in a space fully? Thank you so much. So many great gems here. So my next question is actually catered to you, Allison, but for everyone to answer and respond to. But you spoke a lot about development and density and making that lovable. And I think a lot of practitioners in the room can probably relate to this, how that can be a very scary conversation to approach, especially for specific communities that have been harmed through those mechanisms in the past and even presently. And so, and we all know that can really cause some disruptive barriers and paralyze a project when a community is resisting and fearful of that type of change or density and development coming into a community. So how have you been able to work around some of those community fears and help people understand the impacts and the positive benefits of bringing in density and scaling up a community in that way? And I'd love to hear from you all as well.
I haven't figured it out fully, I want to say that. If you have been to any of my city council meetings recently, I've not fully figured that out. And it's an ongoing challenge. I want to say that too. When we started working, if you guys have seen me speak before, you've probably seen the mini houses before. It's photographable, I have the slides put together, it's easy to talk about. And when we did that project, neighbors were excited. We had 17 variances that I took through one planning commission meeting, and we had universal vote. No comments. Have your variances. That looks fun. Cool, let's do it. We can't wait to see it. I recently did a set of townhouses that are a little bit bigger. So they're in our historic neighborhood in Fayetteville. It was my first non-preservation historic neighborhood project. It was a pretty big lot, big wide street frontage, which is always what we like to see. It had two really junky 50s houses on it. Like, they were not architecturally great, they were in really bad shape, they'd been rentals for a long time, they had been sitting vacant for 2 years when we bought it. It was all of those boxes you would want to check, right? We're not displacing anybody, we're not taking out any good architecture, we can add a ton of density to the best resourced neighborhood in the city in a really walkable, desirable format at a totally different price point than is here, right? That houses in that neighborhood sell on average so there's a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house right now that's for sale in that neighborhood for $750,000. There is a 1-bedroom, 1-bath house that is 1,000 square feet that just sold for $500,000. In Arkansas. If you guys haven't been to Arkansas lately, you should come. There's an art museum that's very nice. It's really great. There are people there who ride in their helicopter to go biking.
Me too.
Yeah, it's not a problem I have, but so we were saying, okay, we're going to do some workforce housing in the historic district. You can walk to downtown. You can walk to this great grocery store that we just put in. This whole neighborhood is full of wealthy white people with coexist bumper stickers and Subarus and, we believe in this household signs in their neighborhood. We were like, this is going to be great. We don't have to have any gentrification worries. We're bringing affordable housing in, little A, right? We're going to build some 2-bedroom townhouses. It's going to look like 5, big houses, but it's really gonna be 10 small houses, secretly. We think we're so clever. You would think that I was gonna like set town hall on fire. There were banners, there was a Facebook group. Somebody came to my house to yell at me. There's an organization there that's about affordable housing. The woman who runs it lived around the corner, and she had her husband come to every single meeting to protest the project. And it took a year and a half to get that thing permitted. And there's a woman who's posted on Facebook probably 280 times in that time period, daily updates about how we're ruining her life. And it's like the cutest little, like we spent way more money than we normally would making these things cute. So maybe that's not a helpful answer, is I have no idea how you do this, because people are way more mad than they used to be, and the people you wouldn't expect to be mad are extra big mad.
Interesting.
Can I tell you why this grinds my gears?
Please do.
Because these were the same people. They were our unsung heroes. The grocery store workers, the baristas. During COVID, we adored them, right? They allowed us to do the things. But now when they want to come into your community, it's a whole different story. And we were talking a lot about language. And this is why I get upset with the phrase workforce housing. Okay, so let me get this right. Who's workforce housing for? The teacher, the fire department, the EMS worker. Oh, okay, but you don't want the grocery store clerk. You don't want those people. So we are, again, still dividing people based off of labels and socioeconomic status to say it's workforce housing, so will you let them in? No, they don't want to. It doesn't matter what you label the building. That is just the bias that still exists, the racism and the segregation that still exists in America. Because I know you made it cute as fuck.
It was. One phrase that you've said twice that is like, for me, because as a planning commissioner, I heard it all the time, and it is like the biggest trigger for me on projects, hearing it, but it's these people. And it is something that people started knowing that if you said that in a hearing, I'd be like, could you come back up to the podium? Will you tell me more about who these people are? Can you be more specific?
Unpack that.
Unpack that for me. And we heard it at those. I'm worried about the kinds of people who are going to live in this kind of project. And like, these aren't, frankly, cheap houses either. I mean, it's like a $300,000 two-bedroom unit, which for a couple, okay, great, they can't buy another house like that without driving into another community. That is not a cheap house, first of all. We're doing as good as we can with this specific project, but like, we're not talking about bringing Section 8 apartments in, and if we were, what's wrong with that? So I think that's these people is always a really good sign for you to keep in mind, and just ask for more information. What do you mean by that? Who are they?
And that's calling them to the carpet. You have to acknowledge the thing and call the thing for people to sometimes realize, like, what I am saying, it's wrong, it's racist, it's inequitable. We are reinforcing segregation. Like, we just have to call the thing, and the more people that do it, if all 600 of you, and whatever your capacity is, do it, that's 600 more people calling these injustices to the carpet.
So I don't know if some of you know, but the wonderful state of California actually a year or so ago state mandated that all jurisdictions, with no exceptions, come up with a set of objective design standards that the city will adopt. If an applicant goes with that objective design standard, it will be approved administratively and will not have to go through a review process, which is a big, huge change for all the privileged NIMBY communities of California, because if you are lucky, it would take a minimum of 3 years to get your application approved right now. So now this is a new state mandate because it's been seen to be one of the biggest reasons why California is one of the most unaffordable states in the entire country. So one of the biggest things that we are doing as we are working with different communities in California is, yes, density, the fear of height, but over a period of time, what I've begun to think is, instead of looking at classic urban design principles where you put the biggest height at a corner or a front of a building, what the neighbors would accept is if the density is hidden. So thinking of massing the building in the middle as opposed to at the edges is a way of being a good neighbor. Also creates less shadows, improves privacy. So that could be a potential middle ground that's working relatively successfully in hiding density. I say relatively because some people will be just these people, so there's nothing we can do about it.
Thank you so much for sharing those perspectives and really the critical role that we play in our different positions to create these environments where people can walk through a process, understand their biases, feel safe enough to do that, and think about how we can support these communities differently. Well, Mukul, Kia, and Allison, y'all killed it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Amazing. So, we are actually a little early, so yay, you get to go to lunch early. But please remember to get back here at 1:30 and we'll begin our afternoon session. Thank you all so much. We'll see you soon.